My name is Charles Coleman. I am 69 years old, and I am finally at peace after a war I never wanted to fight. As a retired transit supervisor, I thought I had built a legacy for my son Andre and his wife Brianna. A home filled with love. That was until I overheard my daughter-in-law whisper her Christmas plan to get my signature on some papers, then move me into a nursing home right after the new year. She called my home a gold mine that needed to be cashed in. I just smiled and kept my silence. The next time they visited, after enjoying a lovely Christmas dinner, they were greeted by a realtor and a large sold sign planted firmly in the front yard. Before I tell you how I turned their greedy plot upside down, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Let me know in the comments below. And please hit that like button and subscribe if you believe that respect for our elders is non-negotiable. My silence wasn't weakness, it was a strategy. A strategy born 32 days before that Christmas on a quiet Tuesday afternoon that started with innocence and ended in betrayal. The house was peaceful, filled with the soft afternoon light that my late wife Rose used to love. I was in my element, doing what I cherished most on a Tuesday, babysitting my 5-year-old granddaughter Maya. She was the light of my life, a perfect blend of my son's features and her grandmother's fiery spirit. After a lunch of chicken nuggets and apple slices, she had drifted off to sleep in her little bed upstairs, the one that used to be Andre's. I tucked her in, breathing in the sweet scent of her shampoo, and felt a profound sense of contentment. Down in the kitchen, I placed the receiver for the baby monitor on the worn Formica countertop. It was an old device prone to static, but it worked. As I began to hum an old Etta James tune that Rose and I used to dance to, I could hear Maya's soft, even breaths coming through the speaker. It was the sound of safety, of love, of a world that was exactly as it should be. I was halfway through washing the lunch dishes, my hands immersed in warm, soapy water, when the front door opened. Andre and Brianna were home earlier than I expected. A pleasant surprise, I thought. I was about to call out a greeting when their voices, sharp and clear, crackled to life from the baby monitor. They were in the foyer directly beneath Maya's room, their voices carrying perfectly. They assumed I was in the backyard tending to Rose's now dormant rose bushes. Brianna's voice came first, laced with an irritation she didn't bother to hide. "God, I hate driving into this part of Brooklyn," she sighed dramatically. "It's so gritty. The moment we cross Atlantic Avenue, I feel like I need to lock the car doors." I paused, the dishcloth in my hand dripping into the sink. It was a familiar complaint, one I'd heard from her a dozen times. She saw the neighborhood where my son grew up, where generations of hardworking families had built lives as nothing more than an inconvenience. "It's home?" Bray Andre's voice was softer, but it lacked conviction. It was the voice of a man who had long ago given up fighting battles with his wife. "I grew up here." "You grew up here," she corrected, her tone sharp and condescending. "That's the point. It's the past. We live in a gated community for a reason. This whole area is just old." She paused, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. Her voice changed, shifting from annoyance to a predatory excitement. It was a tone I recognized from her days as a real estate agent. "Do you have any idea what a brownstone like this is worth now? Zillow estimates $1.5 million, at least. And that's before a proper renovation. We're sitting on a gold mine that he's using as a personal museum." The soapy water suddenly felt cold against my skin. A museum. Was that how she saw my home? This house where every photograph on the wall, every scuff on the floor held a memory. This house where I brought my wife home for the first time, where we raised our son, where I held Rose's hand as she took her last breath. It wasn't a home to her. It was a property, an asset waiting to be liquidated. "That's Dad's money, Brianna, not ours," Andre said. The words were right, but his tone was wrong. It was a token protest, a last gasp of the decent boy I had raised. He knew it was a losing battle. Brianna scoffed, a short, ugly sound that crackled through the speaker. "Oh, don't be so naive, Andre. It's our future. Your last little tech startup cost us $60,000. My commission checks aren't what they used to be. We are drowning in credit card debt, and we are standing inside the life raft." He's 69 years old. How much longer does one man need a 4-bedroom house anyway? I stood frozen, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edge of the sink, my breath caught in my chest. This was more than just idle complaining. This was a plan. This was a plot being hatched in the hallway of my own home. I held my breath, listening, praying that my son would find his spine, that he would stand up for me for his mother's memory. And then her voice dropped to a whisper, a low conspiratorial hiss that was far more terrifying than any shout. It was the sound of a snake coiling before it strikes. "Look," she whispered, the words tinny and distorted, but the venom was unmistakable. "Let him have his last Christmas here. Let him bake his pie and play Santa Claus, enjoy the whole Norman Rockwell fantasy. After the holidays, we find him a nice facility, a clean one. We tell him it's for his own good, that we're worried about him being alone. We'll frame it as a gift of security. He's a proud man, but he's also old. He'll fold." There was a long silence. The only sound from the speaker was the faint electric hum of an open channel. In that silence, I heard my son's betrayal as loudly as if he had screamed it. The seconds stretched on each one a small death. He was weighing his father against his wife's greed, and I already knew which way the scales would tip. Finally, his voice came. It was barely a murmur, a ghost of a sound, heavy with a resignation that broke my heart. "Okay," he breathed. "Okay, Bray. Just let me be the one to talk to him." The dish I was holding slipped from my numb fingers. It didn't shatter. It landed in the soapy water with a dull thud that echoed the thud in my chest. The world around me seemed to fade. The sunlight, the hum of the fridge, the scent of cinnamon in the air, it all disappeared. My universe narrowed to the crackle of the speaker and the cold, hard fact of my son's consent. They thought I was old. They thought I was a relic from a bygone era. They thought I would fold. In that moment, standing over a sink of dirty dishes, a profound and icy calm washed over me. The pain was there, a deep, tectonic crack in my soul, but something else rose from that crack. It was a quiet, unshakable resolve. The man they were plotting against, the gentle father and doting grandfather, had vanished. In his place stood a man they had never met, a man who would not be erased, a strategist. My first move was to slowly, deliberately finish washing the dishes, humming that old Etta James tune as if I hadn't heard a single damning word. That same night, after Andre and Brianna had taken Maya home, the house fell into a profound silence. It was a different kind of quiet than before. It was heavier, colder, filled with the ghosts of the words I had overheard. I couldn't rest. I walked into my small office, a room lined with books on history and jazz records, and sat down at the heavy oak desk that had been my father's. From a locked drawer at the bottom, I retrieved an old leather-bound ledger. The cover was soft and worn from decades of use. This book was meant to track household expenses and repairs, but over the years it had become something else entirely. It had become the unofficial record of my life as a father. I opened it, the smell of old paper and ink rising to meet me. I turned past pages detailing mortgage payments and new water heaters until I reached a fresh, empty page. I picked up a heavy fountain pen, the one I reserved for important signatures, and uncapped it. My hand was perfectly steady. I was no longer a father grieving a betrayal. I was an accountant, and it was time to audit the books. The first entry I thought of was from years ago. The memory was as clear as a photograph. I was sitting at this very desk, and Andre, fresh out of college with a business degree, was sitting in the chair opposite me. He was 22, and the excitement of graduation was already fading, replaced by the crushing reality of his student loan statement. $80,000. It was a staggering sum, an anchor tied to him before his life had even set sail. I remember the look on his face, a mix of fear and shame. He couldn't even meet my eyes. He just stared at the paper in his hands as if it were a verdict. My wife Rose was still with me then. We had our own dreams for retirement, a trip to see the pyramids, maybe a cruise through the Alaskan fjords. We had a nest egg we had carefully built over 30 years, a testament to a lifetime of disciplined saving. We saw the fear in our son's eyes, and without a moment's hesitation, we made a choice. I remember taking the bill from his hand and saying, "Your future is the only investment that matters, son. Your mother and I will take care of this." He looked up, his eyes wide with a relief so profound it looked like pain. "Dad, I can't let you do that," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I just smiled. "It's already done." The next day I wrote the check that drained a significant portion of our life savings. It felt good. It felt right. It was the act of a father securing his son's future. In the ledger under the heading Investments, I wrote Andre's education, and next to it the number 80,000. I turned the page in the ledger. The years flew by. Rose passed on, leaving a hole in my heart, and in this house that could never be filled. Andre met Brianna. At first I was happy for him, but then the requests started. They were subtle at first, then they became expectations. I remember the day they came over to announce their engagement. They were so excited, talking about a future in a high-rise apartment downtown with a view of the city skyline. The problem was the down payment, $100,000. It was an amount so far beyond their reach it was laughable, but they weren't laughing. Brianna did most of the talking, her words smooth and practiced. She called it a strategic investment in their future, a way to build equity. She made it sound like they were doing me a favor by allowing me to participate. Andre just sat there nodding along, a hopeful smile on his face. I looked at my son and I saw a boy who wanted to give the woman he loved the world, even if it meant leveraging his father's entire retirement. I said yes. I sold off a portion of my stock portfolio, the very stocks I had planned to live on, and wrote another check. In the ledger, I wrote Andre and Brianna's home, and next to it, the number 100,000. That was only the beginning. It opened the floodgates. Andre, encouraged by Brianna's belief that he was a misunderstood genius, decided he was an entrepreneur. First, it was a boutique coffee delivery service. It's like Uber, but for caffeine, Dad. It can't fail. That was $40,000 for a commercial espresso machine and a branded van. It failed in 6 months. Then came the artisanal dog biscuit bakery inspired by their new designer poodle. People in this city spend more on their dogs than on their kid's dad. This is a gold mine. That was another $30,000 for baking equipment and organic ingredients. The gold mine went bust in under a year. Each time the speech was the same. Andre would lay out the flawed business plan with breathless enthusiasm, and Brianna would sit beside him, nodding encouragingly, interjecting with buzzwords like market disruption and scalability. They made debt sound like an adventure. Each time I gave in. How could I say no? How could I be the one to stand in the way of my son's dreams? I was his father. It was my job to believe in him, especially when no one else would. My hand moved across the page, my pen scratching in the quiet room. Coffee van, 40,000. Dog biscuits, 30,000. Smart home gadgets, another 25. The numbers piled up, each one a monument to my own willful blindness. I put the pen down. The page was full. A column of dates, descriptions, and numbers. My handwriting was neat, almost clinical, as if I were recording the expenses of a stranger. I reached for the old calculator on my desk, its solar panel covered in a thin layer of dust. I began to type. The soft click of the plastic keys was the only sound in the room. 80,000, plus 100,000, plus 40,000, plus 30,000, plus 25,000. I paused, my finger hovering over the equals button. For a moment, I didn't want to see the result. I was afraid of the stark, undeniable truth it would represent, but I had to know. I pressed the button. The number that appeared on the small LCD screen made the air leave my lungs. $345,000. I stared at the number for a long time. It wasn't a number representing love or support or fatherly duty. It was the price tag of my own foolishness. It was the cost of my son's weakness and his wife's ambition. In their eyes, I wasn't a father. I was a fund, a line of credit that never closed. And in that moment, looking at that cold, hard number, I understood. It was never a gift. It was a series of transactions. And I had been the only one who didn't understand the terms, until now. But the numbers on the page, as shocking as they were, didn't tell the whole story. The true debt they owed me couldn't be measured in dollars. It was measured in memory. It was measured in the ghost of my wife, Rose. I leaned back in my chair, the leather groaning softly, and looked around my small office. My gaze fell on a faded photograph on the wall, a picture of Rose and me, both in our late 20s, standing on the front steps of this very house. We were covered in paint splatters, exhausted but grinning from ear to ear. The bank had barely approved our loan. Our families told us we were crazy. The neighborhood was considered rough back then, and the old brownstone was in a state of near ruin. The windows were boarded up, the plumbing was a disaster, and a family of raccoons had taken up residence in the attic. But Rose saw through the decay. She had a vision. She walked through the dusty, neglected rooms and saw not what they were, but what they could be. She saw a home. And because she saw it, I saw it too. We spent every weekend and every evening for 2 years bringing this place back to life. I remember the smell of sawdust and fresh paint, a scent that for me will always be the smell of hope. I remember us tearing down the hideous water-stained wallpaper in the dining room, only to discover beautiful original brickwork underneath. Rose clapped her hands in delight, her eyes sparkling in a way that always made my heart ache with love. She chose the deep blue color for our bedroom walls, saying it reminded her of the evening sky. I laid the hardwood floors in the living room myself, board by board, my knees screaming in protest, while she sang along to the radio and kept me supplied with iced tea. This house wasn't something we bought. It was something we built, a living testament to our partnership. Every floorboard I sanded, every wall she painted, was a verse in the long love poem of our marriage. This is where we brought Andre home from the hospital, a tiny, squirming bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. This is where we marked his height on a doorframe year after year. This is where we celebrated birthdays and holidays, where we mourned the loss of our parents, and where in the end I held my beautiful Rose in my arms for the very last time in that same bedroom with the deep blue walls. This house wasn't just a structure of brick and wood. It was the repository of my entire life. Brianna never saw any of that. From the moment Andre brought her home to meet me, she looked at this house not as a home, but as a project with flaws. She walked through these rooms with the critical eye of a house flipper, her gaze lingering on things she considered imperfections. I tried to ignore it at first, dismissing it as a difference in taste, a generational gap. But her comments were not just casual observations. They were small, strategic attacks on the very soul of this home, on the memory of my wife. I remember one Sunday dinner about a year ago. We were sitting in the dining room and Brianna was staring at the floral wallpaper, a cheerful pattern of roses and ivy that Rose had picked out. "You know, Charles," she said, tapping her perfectly manicured fingernail on the table, "a simple coat of minimalist gray paint in here would really modernize the space. This floral pattern is a little depressing, don't you think?" I remember the fork freezing halfway to my mouth. Depressing. This wallpaper was the backdrop to every happy family dinner we'd ever had. I looked at Andre, expecting him to say something, but he just busied himself with his food, refusing to meet my eyes. "Your mother-in-law loved this wallpaper," I said quietly. "It stays." Brianna just smiled a tight little smile and said nothing more, but the message was clear. Rose's taste was obsolete. Another time, she stood by the back window looking out at Rose's garden, a lovingly chaotic mix of climbing roses, lavender, and sunflowers. "We could pave all this over," she announced, as if struck by a brilliant idea. "Imagine a modern stone patio, a fire pit, some nice outdoor seating. It would be perfect for entertaining." She wanted to pour concrete over the very soil my wife's hands had nurtured for 30 years. She dismissed the flowers Rose loved as if they were weeds. But the worst was the conversation about the mantelpiece. It's lined with photographs, a timeline of our family. My wedding picture with Rose. Andre as a gap-toothed little boy. Maya's first birthday. Brianna picked up my wedding photo, her thumb brushing over Rose's smiling face. "These old frames are a bit mismatched," she said. "We should get some professional portraits done of me, Andre, and Maya. A nice cohesive set. It would really update the look of the room." I understood then what she was doing. It was a systematic campaign to erase Rose, to strip the house of its history and its heart, to turn it into a generic saleable property devoid of any personal meaning. Every suggestion was a little shovel digging away at the foundation of my life, trying to make it easier for Andre to forget that this wasn't just a house. It was his mother's legacy. It was my sanctuary. And I realized, sitting there in my office, that this fight wasn't just about protecting myself from being thrown into a home. It was about protecting the last physical piece of my wife I had left on this earth. And that was a fight I was not going to lose. My suspicions, now fully awakened, began to see a pattern in things I had previously ignored. I noticed how Brianna had, over the last few months, taken it upon herself to collect my mail. She'd bring it in from the mailbox, sort through it on the kitchen table, and hand me what she deemed important, dismissing the rest as junk mail. She'd presented it as a helpful gesture. "Let me save you the trouble, Charles. So much of this is just clutter," she'd say with a bright, efficient smile. At the time, I had seen it as a sign of a caring, if slightly overbearing, daughter-in-law. Now I saw it for what it was, a strategic interception, an act of a gatekeeper controlling the flow of information. So one evening, long after they had gone home, I waited. The house was dark and silent. I went to the garage and pulled the large blue recycling bin away from the wall. Under the cold glare of a single bare bulb, I began to sift through its contents, old newspapers, empty milk jugs, and the mountain of junk mail Brianna had so helpfully discarded for me. My hands moved carefully, methodically. And then I saw it. Tucked between the pages of a grocery store flyer were several small ripped pieces of a security envelope, the kind with the little clear window. It had been torn into just enough pieces to be dismissed as trash, but not so many that it couldn't be reassembled. My heart began to beat a little faster. I gathered the fragments and took them back inside to my office. Under the bright light of my desk lamp, I felt like an archaeologist piecing together an ancient damning text. I carefully arranged the scraps on a piece of paper and began taping them together. The logo that emerged was from a major credit card company, but one I had never done business with. My name and address were perfectly aligned in the plastic window. It was a credit card statement. A cold dread, sharp and metallic, filled my mouth. With the last piece of tape in place, I held the reconstructed letter in my hand. It was a summary of recent activity for a Platinum Elite Rewards card. A card issued in the name of Charles Coleman. A card with a $25,000 credit limit. A card I had never applied for. My eyes scanned the list of charges, and with each line item the dread turned into a cold, hard fury. There was a charge for $5,000 at a luxury handbag store on Fifth Avenue. I pictured Brianna swinging a new designer bag, a purchase funded by a fraudulent account in my name. There was another charge for $2,000 at a weekend spa retreat in the Hamptons. I imagined her and Andre getting massages and facials, relaxing in plush robes, their weekend of leisure paid for by a phantom version of me. Then there were the restaurants, a string of them, places with French names and menus without prices, where a single dinner cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The total balance was already nearing $15,000, all spent in the last 2 months. I dropped the paper on my desk as if it had burned my hand. This changed everything. Their plan, as I had overheard it, was cruel. It was a plot born of greed and disrespect. But this was a crime. This was identity theft. This was a calculated act of fraud. She hadn't just been planning to take my home. She had already been stealing from me, using my good name and my perfect credit score, a score I had spent a lifetime building, as her personal slush fund. Any lingering trace of paternal softness, any remote possibility of a confrontation that might lead to reconciliation, evaporated in that moment. There would be no family discussion. There would be no tearful appeal to my son's conscience. Brianna had escalated this from a family dispute into a criminal matter. She had handed me the very weapon I needed to not only defend myself, but to ensure that they would face the full consequences of their actions. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet, sleeping street. They thought I was a relic. They thought I was a victim. They had no idea that they had just armed me to the teeth. Armed with the cold, hard proof of their crimes, I knew my next step couldn't be an emotional confrontation. This was no longer a family matter to be argued over the dinner table. This was a war, and in a war, you need a general. I only knew one person fit for the job. Her name is Denise Jackson. Denise and I grew up in the same neighborhood, our families went to the same church, and we'd known each other for over 50 years. While I had spent my life working for the City Transit Authority, Denise had become a titan in the world of Brooklyn real estate. She was a legend, a sharp, impeccably dressed woman who could negotiate a multi-million-dollar deal with the city's most ruthless developers and not even break a sweat. More importantly, she was fiercely protective of our community. She had a reputation for defending older homeowners from predatory buyers and their own greedy families. She had seen this story before. I picked up the phone, my hand steady. I dialed the number to her private line, a number I hadn't used in years. She answered on the second ring, her voice as crisp and efficient as ever. "Denise Jackson." "Denise, it's Charles Coleman." There was a brief pause, and her voice softened just a fraction. "Charles, it's been too long. Is everything all right?" "No," I said, my voice low and even. "No, it isn't. I need to see you. It's urgent, and it's about my house." There was no hesitation on her end. "My office. 1 hour." Then she hung up. Denise's office was on the top floor of a sleek, modern building that looked out over the Brooklyn Bridge. The space was minimalist and powerful, all glass and steel, a world away from the warm, memory-filled rooms of my brownstone. She was standing by the window when I walked in, a silhouette against the glittering city skyline. She turned, and her warm smile was immediately replaced by a look of concern as she saw my face. She didn't waste time with small talk. She just pointed to one of the leather chairs in front of her large glass desk. "Talk to me, Charles." I didn't ramble. I didn't get emotional. I laid out the facts like a prosecutor presenting a case. I started with the baby monitor recounting Brianna's whispered words. I moved on to the old ledger, explaining the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had poured into their lives. And for my final piece of evidence, I slid the reconstructed credit card statement across the polished surface of her desk. I watched her as she read it. She didn't offer sympathy. She didn't say, "Oh, Charles, I'm so sorry." Her face hardened, her jaw tightened, and a look of cold professional anger settled in her eyes. It was the look of a warrior seeing a familiar enemy. She placed the statement down gently, her fingertips resting on my forged signature. She looked up at me, her gaze steady and unwavering. "Elder fraud. Identity theft. This is more than just a family squabble, Charles. This is a felony." "I know," I said. She leaned forward, all business. "So what's the end goal here? Do you want to scare them? Do you want to get them to pay you back?" "No," I said, the word coming out firmer than I expected. "Paying me back is impossible. Scaring them isn't enough. I want them out of my life, and I want to protect my home, Rose's home, from their greed. I want to make sure they can never touch it." Denise nodded slowly, her mind already working, processing variables, formulating a strategy. "Okay, let's talk about the asset. The house is in your name and your name alone, correct? Clear title, no mortgage." "That's right," I said. "I paid it off 15 years ago." "Good," she said, a glimmer of satisfaction in her eyes. "That means they have no legal standing. Zero. We can cut them out completely. So we have a few options. We can put it in a trust, or—" She paused, looking at me intently. "Or we can do something more decisive. You want to sell it, Charles?" The question hung in the air. Selling the house. The thought was a physical pain, a tearing sensation in my chest. Selling the sanctuary Rose and I had built. But what was the alternative? To live there waiting for their next move, knowing they saw it as nothing but a pile of cash. To let them eventually inherit it and tear it apart. I thought of Rose's garden being paved over, her pictures being taken off the mantelpiece. No, never. I met Denise's gaze and nodded firmly. "Yes," I said, "sell it." Denise's expression didn't change, but I saw a new level of respect in her eyes. "Then that's what we'll do," she said, her voice dropping into a determined, strategic tone. "I have a list of cash buyers developers who can close a deal in weeks, not months. We'll do it quietly, an off-market sale. They won't see it coming until it's already done." "Charles," she said, leaning across the desk, her voice a low, powerful promise. "They made the mistake of thinking you were a victim. We're about to teach them that you are a king in a fortress, and they've just been permanently locked out." I left Denise's office with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of grief and betrayal was gone, replaced by the sharp, clear lines of a battle plan. Denise was my general, but I was the soldier on the ground. And my first mission was to gather irrefutable proof, a visual record of their treachery that no one, not a lawyer, not a judge, and certainly not my son, could ever deny. My first stop was not a hardware store or a lawyer's office, but a modern, brightly lit electronics store that I had never stepped foot in before. I felt like a man out of time, surrounded by teenagers looking at drones and headphones. But I was on a mission. I walked past the giant televisions and laptops and went straight to the security section. I spent nearly an hour reading boxes and asking a young, helpful clerk questions. I didn't want a big, obvious system. I needed subtlety. I needed eyes where they would never expect them. I walked out of that store with 3 small, high-definition cameras, all Wi-Fi enabled and disguised as ordinary household objects. One was a digital clock that I planned to place on the mantelpiece in the living room. Another was a USB phone charger, perfect for the wall outlet, right next to my office desk. The last one, and my personal favorite, was a simple black picture frame. That night, after the world had gone to sleep, I became a spy in my own home. My movements were slow and deliberate. I replaced the old clock on the mantelpiece with the new one, angling it just so to get a wide view of the entire room. In my office, I swapped out the old phone charger for the new camera, its tiny lens perfectly positioned to see my desk and laptop. Finally, I took a recent photo of Maya, a beautiful picture of her laughing in the park, and placed it in the new picture frame. I set it on the corner of my desk, a loving tribute to my granddaughter that would also serve as a silent witness. Back in my bedroom, I connected the cameras to my tablet. The video feeds flickered to life, and suddenly I had a secret, godlike view of the most important rooms in my house. I felt a strange and bitter pang of sadness. It had come to this, planting surveillance in the home I had built with Rose. But that sadness was quickly overtaken by a cold, sharp sense of purpose. I was no longer a passive victim. I was a hunter, and I was setting my trap. The trap needed bait. I knew Brianna was opportunistic. She wouldn't be able to resist a chance to get her hands on more of my money, especially if she thought it was easy. The perfect opportunity arrived in the mail 2 days later, tucked inside a pile of what she would have called junk. It was a letter from my bank, a very official-looking pre-approval for a home equity line of credit. A HELOC. It was a standard marketing letter, but the number printed in bold was anything but standard. It offered a credit line of up to $150,000. It was a number designed to make someone's eyes go wide, a tempting, life-changing amount of money. I didn't open it. I left it sealed. The next Tuesday, before Andre and Brianna arrived to drop off Maya, I carefully placed the letter on the small pile of bills on my desk. I didn't put it on top. I tucked it in the middle, partially obscured by a utility bill and a catalog. It was just visible enough to catch the eye of someone who was looking for something they shouldn't be. The stage was set. The cameras were rolling. All I had to do now was wait. 3 days later, Brianna came over alone, using the excuse that she was dropping off some groceries she had picked up for me. Andre was supposedly stuck in a meeting. I knew this was my chance. I greeted her warmly, helped her put the groceries away, and then told her I was going to the backyard for a bit to do some pruning on Rose's old rose bushes. "Take your time, Charles," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You deserve to relax." I went out the back door, but instead of going to the garden, I slipped into my small tool shed. I sat on an overturned bucket in the dim, dusty light, pulled out my tablet, and opened the camera app. My heart was pounding. The show was about to begin. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. I watched her on the screen as she moved around the living room, straightening pillows, running her finger over the dusty mantelpiece. Then she drifted into my office. The phone charger camera gave me a perfect close-up view. I watched as her eyes scanned the pile of mail on my desk. They stopped. She leaned in closer. Her hand, like a snake, darted out and plucked the HELOC letter from the middle of the stack. She glanced nervously toward the back door, then quickly tore the envelope open. I watched her read the letter, her eyes widening at the $150,000 figure. A slow, greedy smile spread across her face. This was it. She sat down in my chair, and pulled a piece of scratch paper from the drawer. And then I watched in stunned silence as she began to practice my signature. Charles Coleman, she wrote over and over again, mimicking the loops and strokes of my handwriting that she had seen on countless checks I had written for them. The picture frame camera captured the intense concentration on her face, her tongue sticking out slightly as she worked. After a dozen attempts, she seemed satisfied. She crumpled up the scratch paper and tucked it into her pocket. Then she opened my laptop. The light from the screen illuminated her face, showing an expression of pure, unadulterated greed. I watched my blood running cold as she navigated to the bank's website. I watched her fingers fly across the keyboard, confidently typing in my name, my address, my date of birth, and my social security number. All the information she had gathered while helping me with my finances. She filled out the entire online application for the line of credit in under 5 minutes. The final step was the digital signature. She clicked the box that read, "I agree to the terms and conditions," and then with a final click of the mouse, she submitted the application. A small, triumphant smile played on her lips. She closed the laptop, carefully placed the opened letter back in the pile of mail, and stood up as if nothing had happened. The crime was complete. In the shed, I tapped the screen on my tablet, saving the entire damning recording. I felt no surprise, only a grim, chilling sense of validation. I now had her. I had captured her true soul on video. The video of Brianna was the smoking gun. It was cold, hard proof of a crime captured in high definition. But as I watched the footage on a loop, a gnawing feeling settled in my gut. The video showed Brianna's hand, her face, her signature. But where was my son in all of this? Was he a willing partner in this scheme, or was he just a weak, manipulated man too blinded by his wife's ambition to see the truth? In my heart, I had to know. I had to give him one last chance to be the man I had raised him to be, the man Rose had adored. I needed to hear it from his own mouth. I needed to confirm his complicity. So I set another trap, this one baited not with a letter but with a father's feigned concern. I called Andre and asked him to come over alone. I told him the faucet in the kitchen sink was leaking a small, believable problem. Before he arrived, I took a tiny digital voice recorder I had purchased and placed it on the coffee table, nestled between a stack of old magazines. It was voice-activated, its small microphone indistinguishable from a piece of modern design. Andre arrived looking flustered, already complaining about traffic. I led him to the kitchen, and for a few minutes we played our familiar roles. I was the aging father, and he was the dutiful, if slightly impatient son. After he had needlessly tightened a connection under the sink, I offered him a glass of iced tea. We sat in the living room in the heavy silence that now seemed to permanently occupy the space between us. This was my moment. I leaned forward, trying to make my voice sound as genuinely confused and worried as possible. "Son," I began, "I got the strangest letter from the bank the other day. It was talking about a home equity line of credit. You're good with all that financial stuff. Do you know what this is all about? Honestly, I'm worried someone might be trying to run a scam on me." I watched his face. It was a perfectly crafted test. I had given him the perfect excuse, the perfect opportunity to come clean. He could have blamed Brianna. He could have feigned shock. He could have done anything other than what he did. I saw a flicker of raw panic in his eyes, a deer in the headlights terror. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his gaze darting around the room, landing everywhere but on my face. "Oh, that," he stammered, forcing a dismissive laugh. "That's probably just junk mail, Dad. You know how they are. They send those things out all the time to try and get old folks to take out loans they don't need. It's predatory. You should just shred it. Seriously, don't worry about it." The lie was clumsy, pathetic. I pressed him just a little to see how deep the deception went. "Are you sure, son? It looked pretty official. Had the bank's logo and everything." His irritation flared a defense mechanism to cover his fear. "Yeah, Dad. I'm sure," he said, his voice a little too loud. "It's nothing. Believe me. I saw it all then. He wasn't just a bystander. He was a gatekeeper actively running interference to protect his wife's criminal behavior." I nodded slowly and backed off, pretending to be reassured. "Okay, son, if you say so." But as I sat there, I felt the last embers of hope for him die out. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by this nervous, dishonest stranger. That evening, I got the rest of the proof I needed. I had invited them for dinner, a regular Sunday meal, a charade of normalcy. The voice recorder was still on the coffee table, a silent, patient sentinel. We ate, we talked about the weather, we discussed Maya's progress in kindergarten. It was agonizing. After dinner, I excused myself to the kitchen to make coffee, leaving them alone in the living room. I stood by the kitchen door, out of sight, and listened. Later that night, I would put on headphones and listen to the recording, and every word would be a nail in my son's coffin. His voice came first, a panicked, urgent whisper. "He knows, Brianna. I'm telling you, he knows. He asked me about the HELOC. He got a letter." I had to lie straight to his face. Brianna's reply was not the voice of a worried spouse. It was the cold, scornful hiss of a ringleader whose accomplice was losing his nerve. "Of course you lied. What were you going to do, confess?" "Don't be an idiot, Andre. He's an old man. He's confused. He probably already forgot about it. You're being paranoid." It didn't feel like he was going to forget, Andre insisted, his voice trembling slightly. "The way he looked at me. What if he calls the bank? What if he finds out what you did?" And then came Brianna's confession. A whisper filled with such arrogance and contempt, it made my blood run cold. "So what if he calls, 'I filled out the application'? The money will be in an online account he doesn't know about by next week. It's bridge financing for your new company, you fool. It's for us. Once we sell the house, we'll pay it back and no one will be the wiser. It's just moving money around. You need to grow a spine and stick to the plan. It's a brilliant plan." There was a long pause. This was it. This was Andre's final chance in the privacy of a conversation with his wife to find his moral compass. He could have said, "This is wrong." He could have said, "We have to stop." He did neither. His voice, when it came, was stripped of all conviction, a hollow echo of a man. "Okay," he sighed, a sound of complete and total surrender. "Okay, Brianna. But if this goes wrong, if he finds out, this is on you." He wasn't worried about the crime. He was just worried about getting caught. In the darkness of my office, listening to my son's voice through the headphones, I felt a profound and desolate sorrow. He had not just been complicit, he had been a coward. He had traded his father for a fantasy, his integrity for a loan application. I saved the audio file, labeling it simply "The Conspiracy." I now had everything: the video of the crime and the audio of the cover-up. The trial, I thought to myself, was going to be very, very short. With the video of Brianna and the audio of Andre's cowardly consent saved and backed up, the evidence phase of my plan was complete. The ball was now in Denise's court. For the next 2 weeks, I lived a double life. To my son and his wife, I was the same old Charles. I babysat Maya. I answered their calls. I feigned ignorance about our finances. I played the part of the aging father. They expected me to be a man blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to break over his head. But in reality, every quiet moment was spent coordinating with my general. We spoke in code using burner phones I'd bought for cash. The final phase of our plan was scheduled to unfold just before Christmas, and we needed to finalize the details. We met one last time, not at her office, but at a small, quiet coffee shop in a part of town they would never visit. It felt like a scene from a spy movie. 2 old friends huddled over cups of black coffee, planning the peaceful overthrow of a corrupt regime. Denise, as always, was the picture of calm professionalism. She carried a thin leather portfolio. She got straight to the point. "It's done," she said, her voice a low, even murmur that wouldn't carry to the next table. She opened the portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper across the table to me. It was a closing statement. The buyer is a development group, Astor Holdings. They paid cash, $1.6 million. The wire transfer cleared this morning. The money is now sitting in a new trust account that only you can access. I used the attorneys you approved. Your son and his wife's names are nowhere near it. As far as the world is concerned, they don't exist. I stared at the number on the page. $1,600,000. It was an amount of money that felt unreal. But the feeling it gave me was not joy or relief. It was a profound, aching sadness. "This is it then," I said, my voice thick. 40 years, Denise. 40 years of memories of raising a family, of loving my wife. And in one morning, it all just becomes a number on a piece of paper. Denise reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her touch was firm, grounding. "No, Charles," she said, her eyes looking directly into mine, full of a fierce, protective loyalty. "The 40 years are in here," she said, tapping her temple with her other hand. "And in here," she added, touching her heart. "That is the part of the house they can never sell, and that is the part you are protecting. The paper is just the armor. They were trying to steal the bricks and the wood, but what they really wanted to steal was your dignity and your peace of mind. You've just made sure they can't have either." I took a deep breath, her words steadying me. She was right. This wasn't an ending. It was a liberation. So I said, my voice clearer now. "What happens next?" "The closing is officially filed with the city tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. December 24th, she said. "As of Christmas Eve, you will legally be a guest in a home you no longer own. The developers have already resold the property to a private family, the Chens. They know the general situation and they have agreed to play their part in this." She checked her watch. "They are scheduled to arrive to take possession of their new property at 11 a.m. on Christmas Day. I will be with them." My mind raced. Christmas Day. The timing was perfect, poetic even. "They're coming over for brunch on Christmas morning," I told her. "They think they're finally going to have the talk with me about my future." A grim, humorless smile touched Denise's lips. "Oh, they'll be having a talk about the future, all right," she said. "Just not the one they were planning." We sat in silence for another moment, the unspoken weight of what was about to happen settling between us. This was the point of no return, the final move in a game I never wanted to play. Denise slid the closing statement back into her portfolio and stood up. "It's time, Charles," she said softly. "It's time to end it." I looked up at my old friend, my general, and I nodded. "Yes," I said. "It's time." Christmas morning arrived not with the joyful ringing of bells, but with the quiet, tense hum of a battle waiting to begin. The scent of Rose's sweet potato pie filled the air, a final fragrant tribute to a life they had tried to erase. Andre and Brianna arrived precisely at 10 a.m., their arms filled with gifts, their faces arranged in masks of festive cheer. We went through the motions, the hollow ritual of exchanging presents. They gave me an expensive watch I would never wear and a cashmere sweater 2 sizes too large. I thanked them, my voice a perfect imitation of a grateful father. Inside, I was a coiled spring, a silent predator waiting for the prey to step into the clearing. After the last of the wrapping paper was cleared away, we sat in the living room with plates of pie and cups of coffee. I saw Andre and Brianna exchange a look, a silent telepathic signal. The performance was about to begin. Brianna set her plate down on the coffee table and moved to sit on the ottoman in front of my armchair. She placed her hand on my knee, her touch meant to convey warmth and intimacy, but it felt as cold and hard as a stone. "Charles." She began, her voice a carefully modulated symphony of concern. "Andre and I have been talking a lot lately, and we're a little worried about you." Andre, on cue, leaned forward from the sofa. He couldn't quite meet my eyes, his gaze fixed on a spot on the carpet. "She's right, Dad. We love you. And because we love you, we have to be honest." Brianna squeezed my knee gently. "This house, it's so big for one person. We worry about you on these old stairs. We worry about you being alone all the time. What if you fell? What if something happened? We wouldn't know for hours." Her face was a perfect mask of loving anxiety. She had a list of reasons, all of them practiced, all of them designed to sound like they were born from love, not from avarice. "And it's not just the safety, it's the burden." She continued, her voice dropping to a softer, more intimate tone. "The property taxes, the upkeep, the leaky faucets. You should be enjoying your retirement, Charles. You've worked hard your entire life. You deserve to be relaxing, not worrying about raking leaves or fixing a broken furnace." Andre chimed in, the dutiful son reciting his lines. "We found this incredible place, Dad. It's called Oakwood Meadows. It's more like a resort than a home. It has a swimming pool, a library, movie nights, organized activities. You'd be surrounded by people your own age. And the best part is there are doctors and nurses on staff 24/7. It would give us such peace of mind knowing you were being looked after." He emphasized their peace of mind. "Of course. My life, my independence was a problem that needed to be solved to alleviate their discomfort." With a final theatrical flourish, Brianna reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a set of glossy tri-fold brochures. She fanned them out on the coffee table. The pictures showed smiling, silver-haired seniors playing cards, doing water aerobics, and laughing over dinner. It was a manufactured paradise, a sterile and soulless replacement for a home filled with a lifetime of memories. "We can take a tour next week," she said, her voice bright with finality, as if the matter was already decided. "We'll handle everything for you, Charles. The paperwork, the movers, everything. You won't have to lift a finger." I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. I picked up one of the brochures, pretending to study the smiling faces of the residents. My face was a mask of thoughtful consideration. Inside my mind was a block of ice, a resort. They had summarized my entire life, my home, my independence, my memories of Rose, and decided it could all be traded for a single room with a meal plan and organized bingo nights. This was the pinnacle of their disrespect, the final condescending dismissal of my entire existence. I saw them exchange another look, a small, triumphant smile passing between them. They thought I was folding. They thought the old man was finally giving in. I carefully placed the brochure back on the table and looked up first at my son, then at his wife. I let a gentle, slightly sad smile touch my lips. My voice when I spoke was soft, tinged with a weary resignation I had been practicing for weeks. "You know," I began, my voice quiet, "you're right. It is a lot for one man. I appreciate you both looking out for me like this. It really does mean a lot." The look of relief on Andre's face was so profound it was almost comical. Brianna's eyes glittered with victory. They had won. It was over. I let them savor their victory for a few seconds more before delivering the line I had been waiting to say for a month. "This is a very big decision," I said, shaking my head slowly as if weighed down by the gravity of it all. "And it feels like the end of an era. So before we talk any more about this, I have something I want to show you, a special home movie I put together for the occasion, a little tribute, a way to say goodbye to this old house. Why don't you have another slice of pie while I set it up?" Brianna and Andre exchanged a look of smug curiosity. A home movie. They probably thought it was going to be a sentimental collection of old family photos, a slideshow of Christmases past, designed to make them feel a little guilty. They settled back on the sofa, Brianna picking up her slice of pie, ready to endure whatever boring nostalgic trip I was about to subject them to. I didn't say a word. I walked over to the large television, my movements unhurried, and connected my laptop with a steady hand. The screen flickered to life, bathing the room in a cold blue light. I clicked a single file on my desktop, an icon simply labeled Family, and the show began. The screen was black for a moment, and then an image appeared. It was a static shot of my living room, the one they were sitting in right now. The angle was from the digital clock on the mantelpiece. In the bottom right corner of the screen, a timestamp glowed with the date from 3 weeks prior. Andre and Brianna leaned forward slightly, their brows furrowed in confusion. The video was silent. After a few seconds, the figure of my daughter-in-law Brianna walked into the frame. She moved with a furtive quickness, glancing over her shoulder toward the back door. Then she drifted out of the shot into my office. The scene immediately cut to a new angle. This one was tight, intimate, showing my office desk in perfect, damning clarity. It was the view from the USB charger. Brianna came into view and sat down in my chair. For a moment, the Brianna on the screen looked almost identical to the Brianna on my sofa, who was now frozen, a forkful of pie halfway to her mouth. The video version of Brianna scanned the mail on my desk. Her eyes locked onto the HELOC letter. I watched my own son turn to look at his wife, a silent, questioning horror dawning on his face. On the screen, Brianna tore open the envelope. The camera was so clear you could almost read the text of the letter as she scanned it. Her eyes widened, and a slow, ugly smile of pure greed spread across her face. And then came the part that made my blood run cold all over again. She opened my desk drawer and pulled out a piece of scratch paper and a pen. With intense concentration, she began to practice my signature. Charles Coleman, she wrote over and over again. The camera captured every detail, every failed attempt she crumpled up every time she held the forged signature up to the light to compare it with a real one from another piece of mail. She wasn't just copying it, she was studying it, learning it, consuming my identity. In the living room, a small choked sound escaped Brianna's throat. The fork clattered from her hand onto the plate. The video on the screen cut to a third and final angle. The view was from the picture frame on the corner of my desk, the one holding the photo of my smiling granddaughter. This angle captured Brianna's face, illuminated by the glow of my laptop screen. The real Brianna on the sofa let out a soft gasp. On the screen, she opened my laptop and began to type with a terrifying confidence. I narrated the scene in a low, calm voice as if I were a documentarian. First, she navigates to the bank's website, I said, my voice cutting through the silent room. Then she types in my personal information, my social security number, my date of birth, my mother's maiden name, all the information she gathered while so helpfully organizing my files for me. I watched Andre's face crumble. The truth was hitting him like a physical blow. On the screen, Brianna's fingers flew across the keyboard as she filled out the online application. Every field was completed, every box was checked. And then came the final moment of the crime. The application asked for a digital signature. Brianna calmly clicked the box agreeing to the terms and conditions on my behalf. Then she moved the cursor and clicked the Submit Application button. A small triumphant smirk touched her lips. She had done it. She had stolen $150,000 of my home's equity, and she believed she had gotten away with it. The video ended, and the screen went black. But the show wasn't over. The final act was audio only. In the dark, silent room, a new sound began to play through the television speakers. It was a recording, slightly muffled, capturing a private, whispered conversation. My son's voice came first, laced with panic. He knows, Brianna. I'm telling you he knows. He asked me about the HELOC. He got a letter. I had to lie straight to his face. Brianna's voice followed, sharp and full of contempt. Of course you lied. What were you going to do? Confess. Don't be an idiot, Andre. He's an old man. He's confused. He probably already forgot about it. You're being paranoid. It didn't feel like he was going to forget. Andre's recorded voice insisted, trembling slightly. What if he calls the bank? What if he finds out what you did? And then came Brianna's full, arrogant confession, her whispered words filling the living room like a toxic gas. So what if he calls? I filled out the application. The money will be in an online account he doesn't know about by next week. It's bridge financing for your new company, you fool. It's for us. Once we sell the house, we'll pay it back and no one will be the wiser. It's just moving money around. You need to grow a spine and stick to the plan. It's a brilliant plan. There was a long, terrible pause in the recording. And then came the final words, the ones that had sealed my son's fate. His voice a hollow whisper of surrender. Okay, Brianna. But if this goes wrong, if he finds out, "This is on you." The audio file ended. The screen remained black. The only sound in the room was the low hum of the television's electronics. The silence was absolute, heavier and more damning than any scream. I slowly reached over and turned on a small table lamp. In its soft glow, I saw their faces. Brianna's was a mask of pure primal terror. Her mouth was open, but no words came out. She was a trapped animal staring into the face of the hunter. Andre was not looking at her. He was not looking at the television. He was staring at me, his face as white as a sheet. The lie was gone. The performance was over. And in his eyes I saw the pathetic, crumbling ruin of the man he could have been. The silence that followed the recording was a living thing. It filled the room, suffocating them in the truth of what they had done. Brianna's face was a chaotic mess of rage and panic, her carefully constructed mask of civility shattered into a million pieces. Andre was a ghost, pale and trembling. His eyes locked on me with a look of pure, agonizing despair. He had been caught, and he knew there was no escape. And then a sound cut through the suffocating tension, as sharp and clear as a judge's gavel. The doorbell rang. Brianna and Andre both jumped at the sound. I, however, had been expecting it. "I'll get that," I said, my voice calm as I stood up from my armchair. I walked to the front door, my steps even and unhurried. When I opened it, Denise Jackson was standing on my porch, looking as powerful and elegant as a queen in her sharp tailored suit. Beside her stood a pleasant middle-aged couple who looked at me with kind, sympathetic eyes. "Denise, Mr. and Mrs. Chen," I said, opening the door wider. "Please come in. Your timing is perfect." They stepped into the foyer. Denise's eyes swept over the scene in the living room, taking in Brianna's terrified fury and Andre's broken form. Her face was a mask of cool professionalism. "What is this?" Andre finally managed to stammer, his voice barely a whisper. "Who are these people, Dad?" Brianna found her voice a harsh, grating sound. "What's going on?" "Charles." Denise stepped forward, taking command of the room. She did not look at me. She addressed Andre and Brianna directly, her tone polite but laced with the cold authority of someone who held all the cards. "Mr. Coleman, Mrs. Coleman, my name is Denise Jackson, and this is Mr. and Mrs. Chen. I believe you are in their house." The statement hung in the air for a moment, so audacious and impossible that it didn't seem to register. Brianna was the first to react, letting out a short, hysterical laugh. "Their house. What on earth are you talking about? This is Charles's house. This is our family home." Denise didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply opened the leather portfolio she was carrying and removed a thick stack of documents held together by a binder clip. "Not anymore," she said, her voice cutting through Brianna's hysteria like glass. "The sale was finalized yesterday morning at 9 a.m. The title was officially transferred. The property now legally belongs to my clients, Mr. and Mrs. Chen. I have copies of the deed and the closing statement right here, all filed with the city." She stepped forward and placed the documents on the coffee table in front of them. "I'm afraid," she said, her voice devoid of any sympathy, "that you're trespassing." Andre stared at the legal papers as if they were a venomous snake. His hands shook so badly he couldn't even reach for them. Brianna just stared, her mind refusing to process the information. While they were frozen in disbelief, Denise gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Mr. Chen. He quietly excused himself and slipped out the front door. A moment later, a sharp, metallic sound came from the front yard. A rhythmic thud, thud, thud. Brianna's head snapped toward the large picture window. And then she saw it. Mr. Chen was standing on the lawn using a small mallet to drive the legs of a large red and white sign into the soft earth. One single brutal word was printed across it in bold black letters: "Sold." That was the moment Brianna finally broke. The sight of that sign, the vulgar commercial finality of it, shattered the last of her composure. A raw, guttural scream tore from her throat. "No!" she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "No, you can't! He can't do that!" She spun to face me, her face contorted in a mask of pure rage. All pretense of the loving daughter-in-law gone forever. "He's not competent to make decisions. We'll sue you. We'll sue all of you." She pointed a trembling finger at me, her eyes wild with hatred. "You senile old fool, you ruined everything." I didn't flinch. I just stood there and watched the performance, the final desperate tantrum of a thwarted thief. Her ugly, truthful soul was finally on display for everyone to see, and in the face of her hysteria, my silence was the most powerful response of all. Brianna's tirade filled the room, a torrent of ugly insults and desperate threats. She called me a fool, a monster, a senile old man who had ruined her life. She was so consumed by her own rage, so lost in the inferno of her thwarted greed, that she didn't even hear the sound that brought her performance to a sudden and dramatic end. A sharp, firm knock on the front door. The sound was so official, so authoritative, that it cut right through her screaming. She stopped mid-insult, her mouth hanging open. Andre, who looked like he had shrunk to half his size, flinched as if the sound were a gunshot. I remained perfectly still. Denise, ever the professional, walked calmly to the door and opened it. Two men stood on the porch. They were not in uniform. They wore sober suits and carried themselves with an unmistakable air of authority. They were detectives. "Good morning," the older of the two men said, his eyes scanning the chaotic scene inside. "We're looking for a Mr. Charles Coleman." I stepped forward, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. "I'm Charles Coleman." The detective nodded, his gaze lingering for a moment on Brianna's terrified face and Andre's broken posture before returning to me. "Sir, my name is Detective Miller. We received a report you filed online last night regarding potential bank fraud and identity theft. We're here to take your official statement." Brianna's face, which had been red with rage, turned the color of chalk. The word fraud, spoken aloud by a police officer in her presence, made the situation terrifyingly real. All the fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a primal animal fear. Andre simply closed his eyes as if hoping that when he opened them again, this would all have been a terrible dream. Detective Miller looked at me, waiting. I didn't need to give him a long, rambling statement. My evidence was prepared. My case was already made. I walked over to the small table where my laptop sat and calmly unplugged a small black USB drive. I held it in my palm for a moment. It felt impossibly small to contain so much betrayal, so much evidence of their crimes. I walked over to the detective and held it out to him. "Detectives," I said, my voice clear and steady without a trace of anger or triumph, "I believe you will find everything you need on this drive. There is high-definition video footage of the fraud being committed, and there is a clear audio recording of the subsequent conspiracy to conceal that fraud." Detective Miller took the USB drive from me, his expression unreadable. He looked from the small piece of plastic in his hand to the two people who were now his primary suspects. He gave a small nod to his partner. The second detective stepped forward. "Andre Coleman, Brianna Coleman," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You need to come with us down to the station to answer some questions." That was when the last vestiges of Brianna's defiance crumbled. "No," she whimpered, actual tears now streaming down her face. "You don't understand. It's him. He's a crazy old man. He's trying to frame us." The detective ignored her protest, taking her arm in a firm but gentle grip. His partner did the same to Andre, who offered no resistance at all. He was utterly defeated, a puppet with its strings cut. As the detective led him towards the door, my son, my only child, looked at me one last time. His eyes were wide, pleading, filled with the terrified disbelief of a little boy who had finally been caught. "Dad," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Dad, please." I looked at my son, the boy I had raised in this very house, the boy I had loved more than my own life, and I felt not hatred, but a deep, profound, and heartbreaking sorrow. This was the end of the line. There were no more checks to write, no more second chances to give. There was only the truth. "I spent my whole life giving you everything I thought you needed, son," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. "A home, an education, a safety net for every time you fell. But I see now that I failed to give you the one thing that matters most. A spine." He flinched as if I had struck him. "This is your final lesson. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. This is the consequence of your choices." I took a step closer, and my final words were for him alone. "You already had a home, Andre. You and your wife chose a prison instead. Goodbye, son." The detectives led them out the door. It closed behind them with a soft final click. And the war was over. That was 3 months ago. The front door of my old home closed that day on a chapter of my life, on a version of my family that no longer exists. I don't live in that house anymore. I now live in a modern apartment on the 20th floor with a wall of windows that overlooks the city skyline. It's smaller, cleaner, and it doesn't have a single ghost. The silence here isn't heavy with unspoken betrayals. It's a peaceful, chosen silence filled only with the sound of the jazz records I play in the evening and the gentle hum of the city below. The $1.6 million from the sale is secure. It isn't for a life of luxury. It's for a life of peace. A significant portion of it now sits in an irrevocable trust for my granddaughter Maya. Her future will be secure, protected from the fallout of her parents' greed and foolishness. I see her on the weekends. I take her to the park and to museums. In her innocent eyes, I still see the legacy of my wife Rose, and I will make sure that legacy is one of love and strength, not of bitterness. Brianna took a plea bargain. She is serving a 2-year sentence for multiple counts of fraud. Andre, for his cooperation, received 5 years of probation. I hear through the grapevine that he's working a menial job trying to pay back the mountain of debt they accumulated. Our relationship is gone. There is nothing left to rebuild. I don't take any joy in my son's downfall. There is a profound and heavy sorrow in it that will likely never leave me. A father should not have to be the architect of his own son's consequences. But I have come to understand that my actions on that Christmas morning were not an act of revenge. They were an act of profound and necessary self-respect. For years I had confused kindness with weakness. I had allowed my love for my son to blind me to the man he had become. I thought that by giving him everything he wanted, I was helping him. In reality, I was crippling him, preventing him from ever learning the value of integrity. My wife Rose helped me build our home with love and sacrifice. She would have been heartbroken to see it become a symbol of greed, a prize to be won through deceit. In selling the house, I wasn't just protecting an asset, I was protecting her memory. I was honoring the life we built by refusing to let it be dismantled by people who did not understand its true worth. I have learned that true strength isn't about how much you can give to your children. It's about teaching them the value of earning things for themselves. And I've learned that sometimes the only way to protect the life you've built is to be willing to let go of the building itself. I am 69 years old. And for the first time in a very long time, I am truly free. The hardest lesson I learned was that unconditional love must never require unconditional disrespect. For too long, I believed my role as a father was to provide a safety net, but I realized a safety net without boundaries is simply a trap that enables bad behavior. True strength isn't just about giving. It's about recognizing your own worth and demanding the respect you deserve. Protecting your peace and your legacy is not an act of selfishness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. It's a lesson that came late in my life, but it's one that has finally set me free. What would you have done if you were in my shoes?